In this video, then, I want to talk to you about Io and why it has all the volcanoes. So I hope you enjoyed the videos and things in the last video. So I think of Io myself as sort of the tortured planet. And why is this tortured? Well, you got to think about it like this. This is an actual photograph of Io, and you see a little volcanic eruption right there, orbiting around, of course, this host planet Jupiter. And by the way, I pulled this picture from a site that you can see the URL of down here. It's basically apod.nasa.gov, and APOD stands for Astronomy Picture of the Day. And every day NASA just posts some photo of something they're doing or working on, or even something from the past, but there's always some really cool looking picture on there to the point where it's something you can even get in the habit of checking every day. So I go there from time to time, and this is one I found. But anyway, the tortured planet. You have to imagine then, if you were Io here, small moon here, volcanic plume, what would it be like being so close to this beast of a planet, Jupiter, this huge planet, Jupiter? Well, that is a big reason why Io has all these volcanoes, and why I call it the tortured planet, for the following reason here. So suppose then that, all right, Jupiter is right here. Let me draw Jupiter in this pinkish color here, I guess. So here's Jupiter. And here's Io right here. So I'll try to capture some of the color it has. There's Io right there, right next to this huge planet here. Okay, there's Jupiter right next to this thing. So what's the first thing that pops in your mind? Well, hopefully gravity. So if you're Io here next to such a large planet like this, then what you're going to get is the pull of gravity on poor Io from this huge planet Jupiter is going to be quite large. So you can definitely just think of some exclamation points next to how big that force is going to be. And I hope you remember when we were talking about the moon, then basically the tidal bulges is going to be enormous on this planet. So what happens here then is, let me once again draw Jupiter right here. This is just all the tidal locking stuff that we discussed a long time ago in relation to our moon. Io is going to have trouble holding on to its spherical shape like this. Why? Hope you remember. Primary reason is because you can sort of divide the moon in half like that, and this half right here is closer to Jupiter than this half over here, which is farther. So this side over here, gravity is going to be very, very strong, and over here, gravity is going to be a bit weaker. Okay, and so what happens then is the moon is going to elongate like this to look something like this. And again, more exclamation points in order, because it's going to be very extreme for this poor moon because of this big beast that it happens to find itself parked around. And it turns out that Io just cannot escape this constant tidal bulging because of Jupiter as it goes around in its orbit around Jupiter. So here is Jupiter right here, and the poor planet Io, when it's sitting here, this poor tortured planet, is going to look like this over here, and it's going to look like this over here, and it's going to look like this over here. Remember, that tidal bulging sort of always has to align with sort of the radial line that takes you inside the planet. That's the way the force of gravity works like that. It always has to align like that. And so as poor Io goes around in its orbit like that, it's bulging this way, then it's bulging this way, then it's bulging this way, and it's bulging this way. And I think, as we did once again, if you can just take your two hands and put them together and rub like this, rub them together, you feel all that heat being generated in there. And so once again, that's exactly what happens inside of poor Io. So if Io was this moon that looked like this, and let's just take maybe, the top half of Io and the bottom half of Io, would sort of split it apart like that. Not that it's splitting or doing anything like that. I'm just trying to make an illustration here. But in this region right here, where the rocks might be touching each other inside the planet, so sort of like right in here, you're going to get all of that really intense rubbing due to Jupiter's gravity. And of course, the physics behind it is that issue of the tidal bulge that happens because of that gravitational pull. So in here, these rocks are going to be rubbing against each other. And when those rocks are done rubbing against each other, as that elongation sort of changes its orientation, it won't be those rocks anymore, but maybe it'll be these rocks rubbing against each other as the planet goes around in its orbit. So the poor planet is constantly undergoing this rubbing motion. Rub. I'm doing this with my hands again. So rub as it goes. And that rubbing is a constant source of heat inside the planet. The rubbing here always causes heat because of the friction. The exact same thing you feel when you rub your hands together is exactly what's going on in the interior of this poor planet. So heat can be generated over here, heat over here, heat over here, heat over here, heat over here. So all told, all these heats that I'm sort of drawing for you here, what can I say then? Io here is just going to always sort of be a hot moon. And of course, all that heat means the rocks can never cool, they can never solidify, that sort of thing. And so the heat has to come out somehow, and it comes out in terms of all these volcanoes and lava. And it can just never settle down. It's never going to be able to cool. And that's what I mean by being tortured by this big planet that it happens to be traveling around. And one last thing also, if that's not bad enough for you, let me just draw sort of a white line here, a white dotted line indicating maybe the orbit of Io, as it goes around Jupiter. And of course, it gets pulled on by Jupiter, but that's not enough. The very next moon, which is Europa, is right here. We'll talk about Europa next. But Europa is also going to have its orbit around Jupiter because it's one of the next Galilean moons. There's something very nice thing to say about Europa. But in this case here, Europa is also torturing poor Io just a tad bit because, of course, Europa is also pulling on poor Io with its own force of gravity. So hard to say exactly what that's going to do, but basically the poor moon Io sits here like this, and it gets a force of gravity this way because of Jupiter, and once in a while a good force of gravity this way from Europa. And I say once in a while because Europa isn't always exactly lined up like this. Maybe Europa would be over here. Let me maybe actually draw this in purple. Maybe Europa might be way over here when Io is over here, something like that. But of course, once in a while it does get a tug from Europa, so it's getting pulled in by Jupiter that way, pulled out by Europa that way. Sometimes these tugs keep going, but the poor planet can just never cool off. And so these volcanoes are a manifestation of all that internal heat because of the tidal bulging that these gravitational poles form. And just remember, the host planet of Io is the big beast called Jupiter, that huge planet with that enormous gravitational pull. Okay, more consequences of being Jupiter's moon on poor tortured Io in the next couple videos.